Hello, my name is Bill Chestnut. I'm a cloud platform and API evangelist for 6Pivot. Most of you, if they do recognize me, it's from the BizTalk world. I've moved jobs about 4 months ago. Moved over and doing a little bit of BizTalk still, but now doing a lot more in the cloud and hybrid integration space. So what I want to talk to you tonight about is Azure API Management. How many people have used Azure API Management? Okay. How many people are using APIs? Okay. So basically what we're going to look at is how the Azure API Management can help you manage your APIs. And we'll look at some of the features in there. Also, we'll look at how much easier it is with Azure API Management to actually publish those APIs out to the public and let them use your APIs if that's what you want to do with your APIs. Okay. So have a bit of an introduction to API management, and basically I've got very few slides. I'm going to spend most of the time actually looking at the components of API management. So publishing an API, testing an API, consuming them from code, and then just a quick summary about that. So some of the features of API management that you may be interested in is it makes it a lot easier to reuse services. So basically, you publish your APIs out there. If you did, like, say you want to place an order, and part of that order you need to look up the client, you need to get some information at the client. If the client's not there, you need to insert the client. Then you need to go get details about the product. If you actually leverage APIs for all of those, you don't have to write a specific single API for placing an order. You can do it through a series of API calls. And there's a lot of tooling starting to develop around reusing those APIs and hooking those APIs together. Azure Logic Apps is one of the tools. You might have also seen the Power Apps side of things from Microsoft. And the latest thing they put out was Microsoft Flow, which lets you use your Office 365, and you can do some simple workflows in there, reusing APIs. They've also got a full set of authorization and authentication. So if you use things like Azure AD, or if you use things like Identity Server 3, or any of those OAuth 2 servers for identity, you can actually hook that up to API management. It can actually let that token pass through. It also can validate the token. And in the developer portal, it bolts that authentication mechanism in there so that when you're testing it, it automatically will generate that test token for you and things like that. So it takes care of a lot of those pieces. You can do just simple basic authentication if you'd like, but it allows you to do authentication with a lot of different sources. The developer portal also supports all of the typical authentication providers like Facebook and Twitter and Google, all of those kind of things for the developer portal. The powerful part of API management is its policies. And basically in there we can do things like we can establish 2 different APIs that call the same backend service. One of those APIs we've instituted a 5-minute caching policy on. So if you're using that particular API to populate some drop downs on your website or something like that, you can set up a cache policy based on that, and then that way you don't hit your backend services as often. You can also do URL rewrite. So if you're building a multi-tenant application and your backend's not quite multi-tenant, and you need to go to a different URL depending on which client it is, you can actually, inside of the policy, you can rewrite which URL you hit. You can also do payload manipulation. At the moment, it doesn't support SOAP, but I was giving this talk in Brisbane a couple of weeks ago, and a company up there, they've actually, with the policies, they've actually taken the REST call, transformed it into a SOAP payload, called a SOAP service, got the response back in the outbound policy, transformed it back to a JSON object, and sent it back. So they were able to use API management to deliver a SOAP web service to a mobile phone through the JSON. So, and also you can implement throttling. So if you do expose your API to the public, you may have different ways of monetizing it. You may offer a free version of your APIs if they hit it less than 5 times a minute. That's a free. If you want to go more than that, you have to pay for it. you can implement a throttling policy in there that will basically lock it down to only allowing 5 calls a minute. If you go over that, it gives you back a 429 error that says you've exceeded your rate, and basically in the message actually tells you how long you have to wait before you can call it again. There's also a full set of reporting, again, to help you monetize your APIs if you want to. So you can see how often they've been called, which particular key has been used to call them, and also what the popular operations are on your APIs. One of the things I took away from the API Days conference they had here in Melbourne in March, I think, is they said to always monitor your APIs when you publish them, because people will find new and interesting ways to use your APIs that you didn't expect. So you need to be able to have some way to figure out what they are using and how often they're using it. It also shows the difference between how long it takes the API to deliver something and how long it takes the back-end call to happen. So you can actually do some work in there to see which one of your back-end calls may need some additional services spun up to handle that load. There's also a full developer portal where you can actually register people that want to use your API. Even your internal developers could use it that way, and basically gives a full test, very similar to the way Swagger does. If you're familiar with Swagger, gives you the testing interface. And also the API management exposes itself as a Git repository. So you can pull the configuration out of your instance of API management. Say you have a dev instance, you pull the configuration out, you make some changes to that configuration, you can publish it to your staging and your production through a Git push. So that's kind of a high-level overview. When I go to publish an API, the typical way I can do it is either take the Swagger from my API or the Waddle from my API, and right in the publisher portal, we can import that, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. Or you can actually design the API directly in the API management portal. So one of the good things about that feature is, say that you're building an API for some developers to build a phone app. They want to get started on the phone app now, and there's about 5 or 6 APIs that you need to provide them. You can actually go into API management, provide them, and in the policies actually return sample objects. So you can actually go ahead and define those returns and let them get started on stuff while you're working on the APIs that you're actually going to expose from the back end. So if we go out to the Azure portal, except I got to find it. Let's go. And if we go into the portal, we see we've got an API management instance here. It is still off the old portal. You have to go into the old portal, and then you go into the publisher portal for the API management. You have a dashboard that comes up to start with. This is probably going to time out my logon. Let me just kill that and go in again. So we come up to a dashboard that shows us all of our different APIs. It shows us some call history, and we can actually dig further into that. So if I go to today's call history, you'll see at that time I was testing that particular API. And if we scroll down, we can see I've got a couple other ones. Anybody familiar with the pet store out on Swagger.io? So I just thought for a try, I would try to import the APIs for that into API management this afternoon. That has basically nothing to do with .NET or anything like that. So I brought that in. What I'll do at the moment, though, is I've got out here in my Azure portal, I go to my app services, and I've got a conference API app that I deployed. It was one they used in the US at the Build conference. And so I'll find the Swagger endpoint for that. So here's the API definition. And this is basically the Swagger endpoint for that particular API. Go back to my API management publisher portal, go to my APIs, do import API, select Swagger, paste in the URL, say I want it from a URL, do that before. There's my URL. I can then tell it that I want to put the word conference. So the name of my instance of API Management, Cloud Integration Training, BC, AzureAPI.net, and then /conference, and then all of those APIs will be after that conference. That way, if you've got some APIs that have the same operations, you can have them segregated at that point. So basically, then I need to go here and do a save. Except I know what's wrong. Let me just put this screen in a slightly different mode. See if I can get it down to a little bit better resolution. It's not gonna cooperate. So there is a save button down there that you can just barely see off the bottom of the screen. So that's going to be going out, pulling the Swagger from that API and importing that Swagger. And we'll see that here's basically the summary of it. I can go here now and I can see each individual operation. I can go to one of the operations and I can see all of the information about that operation. And I can define response codes. If I have other response codes that I want people to know about, I can define those other response codes. And just out of interest today, I went out also and went out to the US FFA or FAA site, and they've got a operation that will give you details about a particular airport code. They didn't have Swagger or anything for me to import, but I was able to go in here and define it directly into it. So I basically defined this get operation and basically defined the particular variables I needed to request, set up both the URL variables and parameters that you could pass, and then I was able to call those. Let me just hop back to the slides now and we'll see a little bit more. So that's basically publishing your API. And again, like I said, I went out there and did the pet store one from Swagger.io. So that's Java code running on Apache. So it doesn't really matter. Any API you can publish. Then what we have is a developer portal. Now what I can do is I can put each one of these products in, or each one of these APIs into a product class. So I might have a product that is my internal development. So all of my internal developers will access the developer portal and get access to the code, be able to test, things like that. So let's hop out to the developer portal. So what I do is I just go up here and I go to the developer portal. And again, all of these things can be exposed with your own domain. So I'm using the API one from Azure, but you can expose all of these out as your own domain. You can also customize the developer portal. So you can go in and replace that page completely with your own. So it can be your logo, all about your APIs, any developer support documentation, things like that that you want to supply. So if we go here now to that FAA one, we can go look at that, and basically it's get an airport status. And we can see that there's all the details about the API. The portal also provides you sample code for your language of choice. And I didn't touch anything in here. It automatically generated that sample code for me. So I can grab that code, and like the C# code that it generates basically is just a console application. Gives me all the details I need about running that API. And for me, being a Microsoft guy, I wouldn't have the slightest idea if somebody asked me, how do I call my API from Objective-C? But they can actually see sample code for calling that API from Objective-C in the portal. And I can go up here now and say, try it. It basically asks me for my codes. I grew up around Cincinnati, so I'll pick that one. It automatically puts my API key in, which is required to call it through API management. Shows me what the URL is going to look like. I hit send it. And we can scroll up and we can see there are the results for that particular query in JSON. This particular API supports multiple formats, so I could also go and ask for it in XML, hit the send, and we'll see that there is the same data in XML. If the backend API didn't support that, I could actually build that in API management policy to basically go in and translate the JSON to XML or XML to JSON if I needed to. We've also got full tracing, trying to keep it down to the 20 or so minutes. You can actually take this URL that appears here, and that will give you a trace of everything API management did coming in, going out to your back end, coming back from your back end, back into API management. So all of that tracing information is available for you. Or actually, now the trace is right there, sorry. That's the cookie location that it's using. So basically, that's the tracing information. And basically, we can expose all of those APIs. If we go back to our APIs here, we'll see that I've got the pet store one. So if we want to look at the pet store application, we can see that all of those APIs are there. And it automatically generated those sample code to call those APIs also. So if I want to use those APIs. Actually, if we hop back to the FAA one real quick, I got that set up in the starter product. So I should be able, if I go in here and do try it, put a value in there, and go down here and hit send. And basically I exceeded my 5 in a minute, and basically I got a rate limit exceeded, try again in 53 seconds. So, and that basically is purely by the configuration and API management. I did not change any of the code because I can't touch the code that the FFA, the web service they're deploying. So basically that's purely in API management. So let's go and go back to the slides. So the other thing we can do is basically I've shown you in the developer portal, you've got all the sample languages. So any of those languages that you want to be able to consume the API from. Just as an example, we did one recently where a company had nothing on the internet. Believe it or not, they had one little couple of page website, but all of their stuff was running inside of their network on thick Windows application against a database. Their competitor put out a Windows Phone app. They were losing market share, so they needed to produce one. So they got this company that was going to write the Windows Phone app for them. They didn't know how to expose their APIs. So basically what we did is put API Management Premium Edition, put a VPN into their DMZ, wrote some APIs that said in their DMZ and query their SQL data and deliver that out through API Management to the Windows Phone app. So that way they didn't have to worry about exposing each one of those services out through a firewall or anything. The API management handled all of that. So one of the things I did want to show you is a little bit about the policies. So I can go here into my management portal, and we go here to policies. And what we have is our policy scope can be our API. So we could select all of our products, but in that case of that starter product, what we have is we have a policy on that starter product that says that rate limit the calls to 5 with a renewal period of 60 seconds. So basically, any API that is part of that starter product, and that starter product basically manifests itself in a way. So if I go up here to the portal and look at my profile, I can see that I've got some keys. So I've got a starter set of keys. I use that in my call. That's when I get that starter rate limiting. If I was a unlimited subscriber, I would use my unlimited key, and then I could go past those 5 calls and have unlimited access to it. Definitely, if you want to monetize your API, it's a way to do that in there. You've got a whole set of things that you can do in these policies. And you also can go and select the individual policy and then you can select an operation, and you can create another policy on that operation. And so you can imagine I've got 3 levels of policies. How do I know which policy is being invoked? What you can do is you can use this view effective policy, and it will show you all of the policies that are in effect for that particular operation. So, and also in here, when you add a policy to your actual operation, if you want it to happen before any of the above policies are invoked, you need to put it before the base call. If you want it to happen after, so if I wanted to change the rate limiting on this one to be 10, because it's a very light service, I could go in there and add a rate limiting code in here that would override that 5 that was in the actual starter product level. And you can see I've got a whole set of them in here. I've got checking the HTTP headers, JSON to XML, XML to JSON, find and replace in the body, restrict IP caller, rewrite to URL, set body contents, write context variables. One of the things I did is one of the APIs I wanted to call was not bringing back a standard JSON object. They had a custom JSON object, but it was really just JSON. So on the output side of this down here, I basically overrode the output. I overrode the content type to be just application JSON instead of what they had. And then my application was able to consume it. It didn't understand the other content type. So let's pretty much hop back to the slides now. So a couple of things in summary. There's a lot of things that API management give you in the way of being able to control people's access to your APIs. Also, we haven't had time to look at, but you can also do reporting on that, so you can see who's calling your API, which key they're using, how often they're calling it, which operation is the most used operation. You can also see how long it's taking the back end to service those operations, all of those kind of things. So basically, it makes a really easy way. Also, you can have several different APIs that may live in different services. Some of them may live in Azure, some may live in AWS, some may live on premises. You can put them all into API management under one URL, so that way you can start bringing things together, even though you don't have everything in one spot, but you want it to look like everything's in one spot. Publish them through API management. As you change things, move the on-premises stuff to the cloud, you can then redirect the back of those APIs back to the cloud. So next step, there is a developer edition of API management out on Azure. It's about $40 a month, and if you have an MSDN subscription, you can put that inside of the MSDN subscription, and that'll allow you to publish APIs and test and do any kind of stuff that you want to do with that. So there are my contact details. And if you're having trouble managing your Azure spending and your AWS spending and things like that, one of the things that 6Pivot does also is we have a product called Cloud Control that brings all of your spending into one portal. And it helps you manage your Azure, AWS, and Google spending. Thank you. Questions? Yes. Yeah, you can go first. Not through API management. You probably could do some fancy stuff in the policies and do it. What I recommend in Azure is either Azure Functions or the newly released Logic Apps. So the whole idea behind Logic Apps is it takes the APIs and makes a workflow out of them. So you could do something where you were placing an order. You need to query to see if the client was there. If the client wasn't there, insert the client, get that information back, check the products, and then place the order as the last thing. And you can do that with the Logic Apps, which is basically just rides on top of the APIs. Yes? Yes?
Could you contrast that with the API gateway monitoring?
It's more, the Application Insights goes a little bit deeper because it actually allows you to hook into your exceptions and things like that. So, but for traffic-wise, the top traffic side of things, API Management and Application Insights would be almost the same in terms of that. They do offer an ability in one of those policies is to do some logging to Event Hub. So because you might be getting really high-speed traffic through your API Management and you want to log things, they give you a policy that allows you to log to Event Hub, and then you can get Application Insights to pull the stuff off of the Event Hub. So you can actually add, that way you could do bodies and things like that if you wanted to call information and stuff. Any other? Yes? There is a little bit, as you can see. Also depends on how much stuff you put in the policies. So if you put a little bit, you can actually see that in the portal. The portal will give you a, in the analytics section of the portal, let's see, as that loads up, there is one of those that gives us the, let's see, the usage. So that shows you the number of calls and the bandwidth that it's using, the health of the service, so the status code, how much of it's coming out of cache. So yeah, this is basically how long it's taking your API the API management to respond when this refreshes, and then down here it's actually how long it's taking your service to respond. So you could see the difference between that to see how much overhead API management's adding to that. So, any other questions? Yes?
Let's say I had an API and app service. What reason would I have to put this on top of it?
It depends on how you're protecting that API. If you've done all the stuff in your code to protect it the way you want to protect it, probably not a lot. But what we're finding is people are wanting to publish a lot of APIs. They have older code they sometimes want to use that may not be set up the way they want to, and they don't want to go touch it. So the API management can offer that extra level of security on there. And also, if you want to open up your DMZ via VPN, you can have that VPN only talk to API management. So it's a little bit cleaner implementation of that. And also, depending on whether you want to go back to your own code and implement things like caching, and whether you want to implement the throttling and stuff like that in your own code, or want something like API management to do that for you. So, is that it? I'll look one more.
So you did have that scenario where you have your own code
Yep.
back end, but if it's still under development, so you're constantly adding new API methods,
Yep.
do you have to keep redoing that import?
Yes, you do. You do it, and you import over an existing API, and it will just update over top of it. I'm working on a blog post at the moment how to automate that through some of the tools, so that you can have it build and deploy your API, and then re-import that into API management as a full CI chain. So yeah. Thank you very much.